People thousands of years ago were more clever and resourceful than we often give them credit for, especially when it came to war. Ancient engineers built things that were way ahead of their time, creating machines that could shoot multiple arrows in seconds, steel that didn't break, and fires that couldn't be put out on water. Looking back at history, seems almost impossible that people could make these things with the simple tools they had, but these are ancient weapons so advanced they shouldn't have existed. For hundreds of years, the Byzantine Empire had a secret weapon that absolutely terrified anyone who tried to attack them by sea. It's a special kind of liquid fire. The scariest part about it was that if you poured water on it, the fire didn't go out. It actually seemed to get hotter and burn even worse. The people who ran the empire kept the recipe completely secret. They knew that if anyone else figured out how to make it, the empire would be in big trouble. Because they kept it a secret for so long, the exact recipe disappeared when the empire finally fell. Today, scientists guess that it had oil, tree sap, and sulfur in it, but nobody knows the real mixture for sure. The weapon was first used in the late 600s when a massive fleet of ships came to attack the capital city of Constantinople. The Byzantine ships had big bronze tubes on the front that worked just like modern flamethrowers. They blasted this burning goo straight at the enemy boats, and because the stuff was sticky, it clung to the sails and the wooden sides of the ships. The emperors treated this secret like the most valuable thing they owned. One emperor even wrote down a rule saying that there were 3 things the empire must never give away to outsiders: royal crown, the royal princesses, and Greek fire. When you think about the ancient Roman army, you probably picture soldiers holding big red shields and short iron swords, but they also used a weapon that worked almost like a modern sniper. It was called the Scorpio. It was a relatively small shooting machine that could throw heavy iron bolts across a field with incredible speed. It was also incredibly accurate. It got its power from thick bundles of rope made from animal muscles and hair. The operators would use a crank to twist these ropes tighter and tighter, and the ropes were twisted all the way back. They held a massive amount of energy. The moment the trigger was pulled, the rope snapped back and shot the bolt forward. The Romans brought these machines with them wherever they went. They'd set them up on top of stone walls, high towers, or wooden carts with wheels. The crews who ran them were highly trained. Old history books say that instead of just shooting blindly into a big crowd of enemies, a good Scorpio operator could aim at a single person hundreds of feet away and hit them dead on. The machine had another great feature. It was small and light, at least compared to the giant catapults that threw heavy rocks. This meant the Roman soldiers could pick it up and move it to different spots, battlefield very quickly if the situation changed. Romans were able to hit targets from a fair distance with near perfect precision, something most other armies could not match for centuries. For a Viking, a good sword was a matter of life and death. Most swords back then were made of cheap iron that held a lot of dirt and air bubbles inside, which meant it could bend or snap right in the middle of a fight. But there was one specific type of sword that was better than all the rest. Archaeologists digging in Europe have found about 170 of these special blades, and they all have the exact same name stamped into the metal: Ulfberht. These swords are so well made that modern metal experts are still confused about how ancient blacksmiths pulled this off. The metal used in a real Ulfberht sword was incredibly clean steel with a lot of carbon mixed in. This made the blade strong enough to smash through armor, but flexible enough that it wouldn't snap when hit with something hard. Scientists found out that this metal was made using a super hot melting process that regular European blacksmiths didn't figure out how to do consistently until hundreds of years later. Experts think the raw metal actually came from trade routes that went all the way down into Central Asia and Persia, where people already knew how to make ultra pure steel. Because these swords were the best in the world, they were incredibly expensive. Only the richest Viking leaders could afford one. In fact, the swords were so famous that other blacksmiths started making fake ones to trick people. Modern researchers have found cheap, low-quality swords with misspelled versions of the Ulfberht name stamped on them. Even today, though, scientists can instantly tell a real one from a fake just by looking at how clean the metal is under a microscope. Long ago, fighters in the Middle East carried swords that became legendary because of how they looked and how sharp they were. Were called Damascus steel swords, named after a famous city in Syria where people bought and sold them. But the special metal used to make them actually came from India in the form of small metal bricks. You could instantly spot one of these swords because the metal had beautiful wavy lines running all through it, looking almost like water flowing down the blade. But those lines were not just for decoration. They were a sign that the metal had been heated and folded in a very specific way. The result was a blade that was extremely hard but also bendable, meaning it could hold a razor-sharp edge without cracking. Old stories from the Middle Ages claim these swords were so sharp they could slice through a metal helmet or even cut a piece of silk fabric floating in the air. Some of those stories might be exaggerated, but the blades really were incredible. Making these swords was an art form that took blacksmiths a lifetime to learn. They had to know exactly how hot to make the fire and exactly how fast to cool the metal down. And sometime in the 1700s, people stopped making them. A lot of historians think this was thanks to trade routes changing. The blacksmiths couldn't get the special metal blocks from India anymore, and because the method for making the blades was passed down by word of mouth and never actually written down, the exact method for making real Damascus steel was lost forever. At first glance, the Roman Pilum doesn't look all that impressive. Looks like a spear, but if you look closer at how it was built, you realize it was actually a piece of brilliant engineering. Roman soldiers didn't use this spear for poking, they threw it right before they ran into a fight with their swords. When the spear was thrown at an enemy army, it would fly through the air and stick deep into the wooden shields. The moment the spear hit the shield, the long, thin iron neck of the spear would bend under its own weight, and this bending was not an accident. The Romans designed it to do exactly that. See, once the spear bent, it was stuck in the shield like this giant hook. The enemy soldier couldn't pull it out, at least not quickly, because it was bent, and they couldn't fight properly because they now had a heavy 6-foot pole dragging their shield down to the ground. Usually the enemy soldier would just have to drop their shield, leaving them wide open. The bent spear also solved another problem. See, in regular ancient battles, if you threw a spear at an enemy and it missed, they could just pick it up off the ground and throw it right back at you. But because the Roman Pilum bent on impact, well, it was now completely useless to the enemy. Pretty brilliant. Most ancient weapons were pretty slow. If you used a regular bow or a standard crossbow, you had to fire one arrow, stop, pull the string back, all your strength, load another arrow, and then aim again. It took a lot of time and effort, but inventors in ancient China came up with a machine that completely changed that. It was called the Repeating Crossbow. It had a wooden box mounted right on top of the bow that held up to 10 arrows at a time. Instead of loading each arrow by hand, the person holding it just had to push and pull a wooden lever back and forth. Pushing the lever pulled the heavy string back. It automatically dropped a new arrow into the slot. Pulling it back further released the string and fired. You could shoot all 10 arrows in just a few seconds. The only real downside to the Repeating Crossbow was that it wasn't as strong as a giant heavy crossbow. Because it was built for speed, the arrows didn't fly with enough force to punch through heavy metal armor. To make up for that, those soldiers would often dip the tips of the arrows in poison. But even without the poison, being able to spray a dozen arrows into the air in seconds was terrifying, and clearly a major step forward in how warfare would play out in the future. In the year 214 BCE, the Roman navy sailed up to the Greek city of Syracuse. The Romans had a massive fleet of ships and expected to conquer the city pretty easily. Instead, they ran face first into the inventions of Archimedes, one of the smartest mathematicians and engineers to ever live. He transformed the city walls into a giant defensive machine. He built several strange defense systems, but the one that terrified the Romans the most was a machine later called the Claw. It was hidden behind the high stone walls facing the ocean, so the ships couldn't see it as they approached. When a Roman ship got too close to the wall, the Greek defenders would swing a massive wooden crane out over the water. Attached to the end of the crane was a giant iron hook on a rope. The hook would drop down, catch the front of the ship, and latch onto the wood. Using a clever system of heavy weights, ropes, and pulleys inside the city, the defenders would pull down on their end of the crane. This would lift the front of the enemy ship completely out of the water, leaving it hanging in the air. After holding onto it for a moment, they'd release the ropes and let the ship just crash back down to the sea. Archaeologists have never found the broken pieces of this machine, so we don't know exactly what it looked like, but modern engineers have built working models using the same math Archimedes used, and they proved it really does work. It works so well that Roman soldiers became terrified of anything poking out over the city walls, worried that a giant hand was about to grab them. Next on the list is the Hwacha, built in the late 1400s by inventors in Korea. On the outside, it looked like a simple two-wheeled wooden cart a couple of soldiers could push around, but mounted on top of that cart was a massive wooden launch pad filled with over 100 holes. Each one of those holes held a special arrow called a ingenious. These weren't normal arrows shot from a bow. They had small gunpowder rockets tied directly to the wooden shafts, and when it was time to fight, the soldier would light a single fuse that connected all those rockets at once. So in this flash of fire and smoke, the cart would unleash a massive swarm of rocket-powered arrows into the sky. This weapon faced its biggest test in the 1590s, when a massive army from Japan invaded Korea. During one famous battle, a small group of Koreans used these rocket carts to hold off an army way bigger than theirs. Wave after wave of rockets filled the sky, creating this wall of fire the enemy just couldn't get through. The Hwacha wasn't built for hitting a single target perfectly, like the Scorpio we talked about before. It was just meant to overwhelm the enemy, covering a massive area with fire all at once. Long before anyone invented gunpowder or cannons, ancient Greek engineers figured out how to build a giant machine that could smash through stone walls from far away. This invention was the Torsion Catapult, and it completely changed how wars were fought around the Mediterranean Sea. When most people think of a catapult, they picture a big, simple piece of wood that would snap forward, but those types of catapults weren't really strong enough to destroy a city. Greeks realized they could get much more power by using a different trick. Similar to the Scorpio we talked about earlier, used bundles of rope made from animal sinew or human hair to load the machine. Soldiers used big gears and cranks to pull the throwing arm backward, and as the arm went back, it twisted the rope bundles tighter, and the tighter they were twisted, the more energy they stored. When the trigger was released, the ropes untwisted, slamming the arm forward with incredible power. The Greeks and later the Romans built these machines in different sizes. During a big battle, an army would line up dozens of these machines outside a city, shoot at the walls for days. That has been the video. We'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next one.